Former Trump advisor Steve Bannon could face legal trouble after defying a congressional subpoena. Bannon was slated to testify about the Capitol riot on Thursday, but refused to show up. The committee is now looking to hold him in criminal contempt. CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killion has more from Capitol Hill.
Former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon was a no-show on Capitol Hill today, skipping his scheduled deposition before the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack.
As much as they hate Trump, as much as they hate me, as much as they hate all these other folks, they fear you.
But just a day earlier, Bannon addressed this Virginia rally.
I pledge allegiance to the flag,
where supporters pledged allegiance to a flag that was allegedly carried during the riot. Bannon was urged not to cooperate by former President Trump, and in a letter obtained by CBS News, Bannon's attorney said until the committee reaches an agreement with the former president over the scope of executive privilege, Mr. Bannon will not be producing documents or testifying.
It's more of the same that we saw during the last 4 years when the former president played rope-a-dope in the courts.
Congressman Adam Schiff sits on the panel, which plans to refer Bannon for criminal contempt. He said anyone else who defies subpoenas could face similar consequences.
What types of penalties do you want these individuals to face?
Whatever penalties are necessary to ensure compliance.
Does that mean jail time?
Depends on the person, but it could mean jail time, yes.
Bannon was in close contact with the former president in the days leading up to January 6th, warning all hell would break loose. Mr. Trump said in a statement tonight the January 6th Unselect Committee should hold themselves in criminal contempt.
Nicole Killion joins me now from Capitol Hill, along with CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson. Jessica is also a professor at Loyola Law School. Nicole, I'll start with you. The full House will have to vote on recommending criminal contempt charges against Steve Bannon. Is that expected to pass?
Well, I spoke with Congressman Adam Schiff, who sits on the Select Committee, and he seems to think that it will. But certainly this is likely to raise some consternation, particularly among GOP lawmakers. That being said, this is a process that could take some time. We do expect the Select Committee to vote next week on whether to move forward with holding Mr. Bannon in criminal contempt, something they are likely to do given the notice that they put out today. But as you mentioned, after that, it will have to be referred to the full House, and then if it's voted out of the House, at that point, it will ultimately be referred to the Department of Justice.
So, Jessica, talk us through the legality of this case. What are the issues at hand, and what sort of penalties could Bannon face if he's charged with criminal contempt?
The idea that the House Select Committee has said, here's a subpoena. He's defied that subpoena. They've said, we'll hold you in criminal contempt. He still did not show up for a deposition that was scheduled today. And the House Select Committee, as we know, is going to vote on Tuesday, and then it will be sent to the full House. And then there'll be, as you just discussed, a recommendation to the Department of Justice. They're going to look at the criminal contempt statute and decide whether or not to proceed. Frankly, in this case, it looks pretty clear that there was a valid subpoena. This isn't a fishing expedition. There's a lot of important information concerning January 6th, which Steve Bannon is privy to. And the Department of Justice will decide whether or not to proceed. You asked me about criminal penalties. Here, we'd be looking at 1 to 12 months in federal prison and up to $1,000 fine.
Well, Jessica, as Nicole reported, former President Trump urged Bannon not to cooperate with the committee. Could those actions lead to any legal consequences for the former president?
They could. So there is a federal statute that deals with obstructing congressional proceedings, and you'd have to look at basically three things. Did the person know that there were congressional proceedings? Did they try and interfere? And did they try and interfere by corruptly trying to stop the process or impede the process and intentionally doing so? Now, in this case, the complicating factor is that former President Trump would say, well, look, I was just trying to tell people to assert executive privilege. I thought that, in fact, they should be subject to the protection of executive privilege. So it could be difficult to show that intent aspect of the federal charge of obstructing congressional proceedings. I know for a lot of people, they might feel like, of course he's trying to stall these proceedings. That's slightly different from being able to prove that the federal crime at issue here.
Nicole, several other people close to Mr. Trump, including his former chief of staff and his social media director, were expected to be interviewed this week, but those depositions have been pushed back. I'm wondering what more you can tell us about that. And do we know if those two are, in fact, cooperating with the committee?
Well, the committee has acknowledged that several of these former aides are engaging with the committee, including Kash Patel, who was a former Defense Department official, as well as Mark Meadows, who was the former president's chief of staff. So, as far as the depositions, we expected Kash Patel to do that today, but kind of once all this stuff went down with Steve Bannon, then we learned that, those depositions for both Patel and Mark Meadows will be postponed, that these would be short postponements. We don't know what that means, if that's just a couple of days, a couple of weeks, but we'll continue to report that out. As for Dan Scavino, the committee reportedly had some trouble serving him, and so because of that, his deposition has also been postponed, and so he was supposed to appear before the committee tomorrow. But the bottom line is all of these aides and officials had close contact with the former president in the run-up to January 6th, and so that's why the committee wants to talk to them. They want to know what these officials knew, again, prior to January 6th and what was going on in the White House the day of. So that's why they want these officials to speak and appear before the committee.
And Nicole, there's another legal matter I want you to weigh in on. Former President Trump's going to be questioned Monday in a lawsuit filed against him connected to a 2015 protest outside of Trump Tower. What more can you tell us about that case? And do we know if the former president will show up for questioning?
So at this point, we expect that he will show up for questioning, according to court documents, but he is supposed to give a videotaped deposition, and this involves an incident that happened before he even became president, when he was still just a candidate. This was in the fall of 2015, and, he had made some incendiary comments about Mexican immigrants, and so consequently there was a protest outside of Trump Tower, and these protesters allege that some members of the then candidate Trump security team assaulted them. As you can see, it was quite a scene that occurred back then. So that's what this case involves. And again, the former president at this point expected to give that taped deposition on Monday.
And Jessica, what sort of penalties might the former president face if he loses this lawsuit? And what might be the consequences if he does not, in fact, show up for the deposition on Monday?
Well, so first, the lawsuit is, of course, a civil lawsuit in state court. The protesters are suing based on them being, they say, assaulted, and they said their First Amendment rights were violated. So we're talking about a civil rights violation as well. And in these civil cases, what we're talking about is potentially money damages. And we don't know the exact amount. That would depend on if this actually goes to a jury trial or if they decide to settle out of court. And that decision could in part be made after both sides hear the deposition testimony, on Monday. Now, if President Trump doesn't show up, then there have been a lot of delays already in this case. Some people might remember that back in 2019, in this case, the judge said, I know you're trying to assert executive privilege here, but you weren't actually an executive at the time that these actions took place. You weren't the president. So no, I'm not going to go ahead and bless that particular defense. And this deposition was actually set for last month. Then there was another delay. So it depends on whether or not the judge will say, okay, one more delay. If President Trump just doesn't show up, then you could be held in contempt of court.
All right. Nicole Killion, Jessica Levinson, thank you both.